She escaped her violent past by hiding in a Mafia boss's car. He didn't ask who she was. He didn't raise his voice. He simply chose to protect her. I didn't know the man sitting in the front seat of that black luxury sedan controlled half the city without ever touching a gun. I only knew that the man chasing me through the rain-soaked street had finally decided I was easier to break than to keep. If the thought of running from one kind of violence straight into another makes your chest tighten, stay with me, because the decision I make tonight doesn't just save my life. Costs me something far more dangerous. The bruise on my ribs was still tender, a dull reminder of last week's mistake, speaking when I should have stayed silent. That had been my existence for years. Measuring every word, shrinking every movement, learning how to disappear inside my own skin. I stayed because he told me I was nothing without him. I believed him, until I found the envelope hidden behind the breaker panel. Numbers. And my own circled in red. I ran before fear could talk me out of it. Barefoot. No phone. No plan. I made it 2 blocks before I heard his footsteps gaining ground. Panic does something cruel to logic. It points you toward survival and nothing else. I ducked into an underground garage beneath a glass tower that screamed wealth I'd never touch. My lungs burned. The echo of pursuit bounced off concrete walls. I was out of time. That's when I saw it. Black sedan. Engine idling. Door unlocked. I slipped inside and folded myself low, pressing into shadow and leather and silence. The door closed. The car didn't move. Then the driver spoke. Calm, controlled, unmistakably dangerous. And before I could beg, Adriano Moretti made a choice that changed everything. I learned early that violence doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes quietly, wrapped in rules and apologies, disguised as concern. In our apartment, silence was safety. I learned to read the air the way sailors read weather. His footsteps, the set of his jaw, the way he closed a door too carefully. Every day was an equation. Say less, take up less space, survive. He never hit me where people could see. He preferred reminders, tight grips on my arm, a shove that looked accidental, words sharpened until they cut deeper than hands ever could. He told me I was difficult to love, that I should be grateful someone tolerated me. Over time I believed him. Belief is easier than resistance when resistance costs too much. The night everything broke, it wasn't a scream or a blow. It was a folder I wasn't meant to see, tucked behind a loose panel in the hall. Numbers. Timeline. My name wasn't written like the others. It was circled. Claim. I didn't understand all of it, but I understood enough. I wasn't a partner anymore. I was a solution. Fear didn't explode. It went cold. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic outside, the ordinary sounds of a life that had been quietly closing in on me. I thought about all the times I'd stayed because leaving felt impossible. I thought about how impossible staying had just become. I didn't pack. I didn't leave a note. I slipped on shoes with shaking hands and opened the door as carefully as if the apartment itself might wake him. The hallway smelled like dust and old paint. My heart hammered loud enough that I was sure it could be heard. When I stepped outside, the night air hit my face like a shock. For the first time in years, there was nothing between me and the world. No permission to ask. No rules to follow. Ran. Not because I knew where I was going, but because standing still was no longer an option. The sound of his voice followed me down the stairwell, sharp and furious, cutting through the night like a blade. He hadn't expected me to leave. That was the mistake that bought me seconds. I took them all. My shoes slapped against wet pavement as I burst onto the street, breath tearing in and out of my chest. The city didn't notice me. Cars passed. Windows glowed. Somewhere people were laughing. The world kept going while mine narrowed to one thought. Don't let him catch you. I didn't look back at first. I knew better. Looking back made you slow, and slowing was dangerous. I turned corners at random, cutting through alleys slick with rain and old oil, my lungs burning, my legs screaming. Every shadow looked like him. Every sound felt too close. Then I heard it, the scrape of shoes behind me, faster than mine. Too familiar. Panic flooded my body, hot and blinding. I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw him under the streetlight, face twisted with something worse than anger. Possession. He wasn't chasing to talk. He was chasing to reclaim. I veered toward a row of glass towers, places meant for people with money and safety I'd never touched. An underground garage yawned open at the base of one building, bright and echoing. I ran inside, my footsteps multiplying against concrete, my breath coming apart. There was nowhere to hide. No doors. No corners deep enough. My chest seized as I realized the truth. I was trapped. That's when I saw the car. Black, polished, engine running. Too expensive to belong to someone careless. The rear door wasn't fully shut, just enough space to tempt fate. I didn't think about consequences. I thought about survival. I slipped inside and folded myself low, pressing into the floor as the door clicked closed. The smell hit me first. Leather, clean metal, something controlled and sharp. My heart thundered so hard I was sure it would give me away. Footsteps echoed closer. A shadow crossed the car. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the door to be ripped open, for hands to drag me back into a life I'd just fled. Instead, the car remained still. And somewhere above me, a presence shifted. Calm, deliberate, like something powerful had just noticed I existed. I stayed pressed to the floor, barely breathing, my cheek against cold leather. From where I was curled, I could see the edge of a polished shoe, perfectly still. No frantic movement. No startled curse. Just silence, heavy and deliberate. A voice spoke from the front seat, low and even, finishing a phone call in a language I didn't understand. There was no urgency in it, no irritation, only control. Whoever he was speaking to listened. When the call ended, the line went dead without ceremony. Then the silence shifted. I felt it before I saw him move. A subtle change in the air, like the moment before a storm decides where to break. He turned slightly, and his gaze found me in the shadows between the seats. Dark eyes, steady and unreadable, assessed me without surprise. I waited for anger, for questions, for the sharp edge of judgment I knew too well. None came. He took me in slowly, the dirt on my knees, the tremor in my hands, the way my body had folded itself small without being told. His expression didn't soften, but it didn't harden either. It was as if he were observing a fact, not a problem. A shape moved outside the car. Shadow too close. My heart slammed into my ribs. I heard the sound of a fist striking metal, muffled but violent, followed by a voice I recognized instantly. My whole body reacted before my mind could. Muscles tightening, breath stuttering, fear clawing its way up my throat. I made a small sound. I couldn't stop it. The man in the front seat didn't flinch. He didn't look toward the window. His attention stayed on me, sharp and focused, as if the noise outside was irrelevant. He leaned back just enough for me to see his face more clearly. Clean lines, calm features, the kind of stillness that came from knowing exactly how much power you had. "Stay where you are," he said quietly. It wasn't a request. It wasn't cruel. It was certainty. He reached back then, his hand entering my space without haste. Froze. His fingers didn't grab or search. They rested briefly on my shoulder, solid and grounding, like an anchor dropped into chaos. "He won't touch you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not again." Something inside me broke, not from fear, but from the unfamiliar weight of being believed. The car began to move, smooth and unhurried. As the sound outside faded, I realized the truth with a strange clarity. I didn't know who Adriano Moretti was, but he had just decided my life was his responsibility. The drive stretched on without a single word. I stayed low at first, unsure if I was allowed to move, listening to the quiet hum of the engine and the muted city sounds slipping past thick glass. The car didn't speed. It didn't hesitate. It moved with the confidence of something that knew the road would clear for it. Eventually, the tension in my body began to ache. Slowly, I pushed myself upright, careful not to draw attention. Adriano sat in the front seat, posture relaxed, one hand resting lightly near the wheel. He didn't look back at me, but I had the strange certainty that he knew exactly when I moved, exactly how fast my heart was still beating. The city changed as we drove. The noise thinned. Streets widened. Lights grew colder and more deliberate. When the car finally slowed, it descended, spiraling downward into a private underground garage washed in white light. The doors closed behind us with a sound that felt final. The engine cut. For a moment nothing happened. Then Adriano stepped out, his movements unhurried. Two men appeared from nowhere, dressed in dark suits, their eyes sharp and respectful. They acknowledged him with small, precise nods. None of them looked surprised to see me. Adriano opened the rear door and extended his hand. This time it wasn't an order. It was an offer. Took it. My legs trembled as I stood, suddenly aware of how disheveled I must look. Scraped palms, damp hair, borrowed safety clinging to me like a fragile thing. Adriano's gaze flicked over me once, not lingering, not judging, as if my condition was already accounted for. Inside, the building rose in glass and steel, quiet as a held breath. Elevators opened without buttons being pressed. Hallways stretched clean and endless, free of clutter, free of noise. Everything was controlled. Everything was secure. "This is my residence," Adriano said as we walked. "You are safe here." The word landed gently, but it didn't quite settle. He stopped near a set of doors and turned to face me. "No one enters this building without my permission," he continued calmly. "And no one takes what is under my protection." Under my protection. The doors opened to a room larger than anywhere I'd ever slept. Soft lighting. Clean lines. A bed that looked untouched by fear. When I stepped inside, the silence wrapped around me, thick and reassuring. Adriano didn't follow. "Rest," he said simply. "We will speak later." The doors closed behind him. I stood alone in the quiet, breathing in air that didn't smell like danger, staring at a world that felt impossibly distant from the life I'd just escaped. For the first time in years, nothing hurt. No one was watching me. Felt like safety. And somehow, that scared me more than the chase ever had. The first sign that something had changed came the next morning, quietly, the way everything did in Adriano's world. I woke to sunlight filtering through sheer curtains and a silence so complete it felt artificial. For a few seconds, I didn't remember where I was. Then my body did, stiff with the memory of running, hiding, waiting to be found. A tray had been left near the door. Coffee. Food I didn't recognize but smelled rich and warm. No note. No instructions. Just provision. I ate slowly, half expecting someone to burst in and tell me I didn't deserve it. No one did. It wasn't until later, when I wandered toward the window and looked down at the city far below, that I noticed the news playing silently on a mounted screen across the room. I turned up the volume, curiosity prickling at my skin. They were talking about him. Not by name. Never by name. They spoke of a man found unconscious in an alley 2 districts away. Of outstanding warrants resurfacing. Of frozen accounts and sudden seizures. Of a life unraveling all at once, efficiently, like threads being pulled from a seam. I sank onto the edge of the bed as the reporter continued, voice steady, detached. No mention of violence. No spectacle. Just facts. Consequences. I knew who they meant. My hands began to shake, not with fear, but with understanding. Adriano hadn't chased him. He hadn't threatened him. He hadn't needed to. In Adriano's world, danger didn't explode. It vanished. A knock came at the door. Controlled. One of the men from the garage stood there. His expression neutral. "Mr. Moretti will see you this evening," he said. That was all. The hours stretched after that, heavy with thought. I replayed every moment from the car, every word Adriano had spoken. He had never promised kindness. Only protection. And now I was beginning to see what that promise truly meant. That night, when I was escorted into a private dining room overlooking the city, Adriano was already there. He stood as I entered, a small courtesy that somehow felt deliberate. "You've heard," he said, not asking. "Yes," I replied. My voice sounded distant to my own ears. What happens to him now?" Adriano regarded me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "He will no longer be a problem," he said simply. "For you or for anyone." There was no pride in it, no cruelty, just certainty. I realized then that safety here wasn't built on walls or guards. It was built on reach, on decisions made quietly, permanently. And I understood the truth beneath the comfort, settling cold and clear in my chest. Protection, in Adriano Moretti's world, always cost something. I just didn't know yet what he expected in return. The change didn't come as a grand gesture. It arrived in small, deliberate moments, each one unsettling in its own quiet way. It started with clothing. A woman I hadn't met before appeared one afternoon, her movements efficient, her expression polite but distant. She gestured toward the wardrobe and began replacing its contents without asking my opinion. Soft fabrics, tailored lines, colors chosen with care. Nothing revealing. Nothing meant to hide me either. When I hesitated, fingers brushing a sleeve I would never have dared touch before, the woman simply said, "Mr. Moretti prefers that what is under his protection is treated properly." Treated properly. Later at dinner, Adriano noticed the way I sat. Shoulders curved inward, hands folded too tightly in my lap. Old habits. Old rules. I waited for instruction, for permission to reach for anything on the table. He noticed. "You don't need to wait," he said calmly. I flinched before I could stop myself, heat flooding my face. "I'm fine," I murmured, the automatic lie slipping out easily. Adriano set his glass down, the sound precise, final. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't correct me directly. He simply reached across the table and placed food onto my plate, his movements unhurried. "In this house," he said, "you eat when you are hungry. You speak when you have something to say. No one decides your worth for you." The words landed heavier than any command I'd ever received. Took a bite. My hands shook, but I didn't stop. Another day, another quiet reclaiming. We passed through a public space together, one of his properties, sleek and impersonal. Someone looked at me too long, their gaze sharp with curiosity, dismissive in a way I knew too well. Before I could shrink away, Adriano stepped slightly closer, not touching me, just aligning himself beside me. The look vanished instantly. He didn't acknowledge it afterward. He didn't need to. His presence spoke for me when I still didn't know how. That night, standing alone in my room, I studied my reflection in the mirror. I looked the same, bruised in places no one could see, scared in ways no fabric could hide. But something subtle had shifted. For the first time, dignity wasn't something I had to earn by obedience or silence. It wasn't something I had to beg for or prove I deserved. Adriano wasn't fixing me. He was refusing to let the world continue breaking me. And that realization was both healing and terrifying, because it made me wonder how much of myself I'd forgotten how to protect on my own. We left the residence just after midday, the city bright and indifferent beyond the tinted windows. Adriano hadn't asked if I wanted to come. He never did. He simply said, "You'll stay close," and somehow that felt less like an order and more like an assurance. The place we arrived at was all glass and marble, the kind of building that reflected the sky and pretended nothing ugly ever happened inside. As soon as we stepped through the doors, the air changed. Conversations softened. People moved aside without being told. Eyes followed Adriano, not openly but carefully, like gravity had shifted and everyone felt it. Felt it too. We hadn't gone far when it happened. A man near the reception desk glanced at me, his mouth curling in something between amusement and judgment. I recognized the look instantly. It was the look that measured, dismissed, decided. My shoulders drew inward before I could stop them. The man spoke, his tone light, careless. Didn't know guests were allowed in like this. The room seemed to hold its breath. Adriano stopped. He didn't turn fully at first. He simply angled his head slightly, enough for the man to understand he had been acknowledged. Adriano's expression remained calm, almost bored. "She is with me," he said. The man laughed nervously, trying to recover. "Of course. I just meant." "You meant exactly what you said," Adriano replied, his voice still even. "And you said it in front of others." Silence fell hard and absolute. Adriano finally faced him, his gaze steady and unblinking. "You manage accounts here," he continued, as if discussing the weather. "By tomorrow morning you won't." The color drained from the man's face. "Mr. Moretti, Adriano raised a hand. The gesture was small, precise. It ended the conversation. No shouting followed. No threats. Two men stepped forward quietly, already moving the man aside. Business resumed around us as if nothing had happened, as if a life hadn't just been altered with a sentence. I stood frozen, heart racing. Adriano turned to me then, his attention softening just enough to be noticeable. "You don't lower yourself to make others comfortable," he said quietly. "Anyone who asks you to does not belong in your presence." We continued walking. People nodded. Doors opened. The city bent without ever appearing to bow. Only when we were back in the car did I exhale fully, my hands trembling. Adriano noticed. He always noticed. "That," he said calmly, "is what protection looks like." I stared out at the city rushing past, understanding settling heavy in my chest. This wasn't kindness. It was power, applied with terrifying precision. And it was being used for me. The answer came to me by accident, the way most truths do when they're never meant to be offered freely. Adriano was away that evening, the residence quieter than usual, the silence less comforting without his presence anchoring it. I wandered farther than I normally did, drawn not by curiosity but by restlessness. His study sat at the end of a corridor I hadn't entered before, its door ajar just enough to suggest permission where none had been given. Inside, the room smelled faintly of leather and old paper. Power lived here, not loudly but permanently. I told myself I would only look, only ground myself in something solid. Then I saw the folder on his desk. It wasn't labeled with a name I recognized at first. Those dates, transactions, clean lines of information laid out with brutal efficiency. I shouldn't have touched it. My hands did anyway. I found the familiar details halfway through. Dresses, counts, a pattern that tightened around my chest as recognition bloomed. And then, at the bottom of the page, a single note in a precise hand, written days before I climbed into his car. Risk acceptable. Asset secured. My name followed. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the desk, breathing shallow, the air suddenly too thin. I wasn't here because I was lucky. I wasn't here because I had been seen and spared on impulse. I had been chosen. The realization stripped something warm away, leaving clarity in its place. Adriano had known who I was before he spoke to me. He had understood the reach of my past, the leverage it offered. My abuser hadn't been removed for justice or mercy. He had been eliminated because he was inefficient, because he stood in the way of a larger strategy. Protection hadn't been granted. It had been invested. Footsteps sounded in the hall. I closed the folder just as Adriano entered, rain still clinging faintly to his coat. His gaze went immediately to my face, sharp and assessing. "You found it," he said quietly. I nodded, unable to speak past the weight in my throat. Was I ever a choice? Yes. Or just a calculation? He studied me for a long moment, something unreadable flickering beneath his composure. "Both," he answered at last. "I don't make decisions without reason. But I don't protect what I don't intend to keep." The words settled between us, heavy with implication. I realized then that the shield around me was real, but it wasn't selfless. And if I wanted more than safety, I would have to decide what I was willing to risk to claim it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window instead, watching the city glow beneath me, thinking about how easy it would be to stay. How simple it would be to accept the rules, the protection, the silence. Safety had never felt like this. Solid, unquestioned, enforced. The night she ran, the city didn't notice. Footsteps echoed behind her. Too close, too familiar. Rain blurred the streetlights as panic narrowed the world to one thought. Don't stop. Don't look back. When the garage swallowed her whole, she knew the truth. There was nowhere left to run. Then she saw the car. Black. Silent. Waiting. She slipped inside and disappeared into shadow, heart pounding so hard it felt louder than the engine. She didn't know whose car it was. She only knew the man outside was done pretending. Door closed. The world held its breath. From the front seat, a calm voice finished a phone call. Measured, controlled, dangerous in its restraint. Dark eyes found her in the dark. No shouting. No questions. Outside the banging began. She braced for betrayal. Instead, a hand steadied her shoulder. A whisper cut through the chaos. Stay down. He won't touch you again. Car moved. And just like that, her life was taken out of one kind of violence and driven straight into another. Adriano Moretti doesn't make impulsive choices. He rules quietly. He protects what he claims. Inside his world of glass and silence, danger doesn't explode, it disappears. For the first time, Elena is safe. Federal scene. Shielded. But protection has a price. Because this rescue wasn't random. This safety wasn't free. And the truth waiting behind the walls is far more terrifying than the chase she escaped. Is she protected? Or owned? When safety becomes a cage, there's only one question left to answer. Safe or free? Subscribe now, because this story doesn't unfold gently.